Okay, so next up, we're gonna test Lindsay's shoulder flexion in her left shoulder. Okay, same thing, I'm gonna have Lindsay start with her hands at her side. Okay, she's gonna reach back as far as she can, getting full range of motion. We're gonna place the fulcrum at the access range of motion, which is about right here. Okay, and then the stationary arm. Okay, the stationary arm right there. And the stationary arm is gonna line up with the midline of her thorax. From there, I'm gonna go here. Just hold that position for me. Still lined up with the midline of the thorax. And then we're gonna line this up with her lateral epicondyle. And good. And then her range of motion for this is 164 degrees. Okay, 164 degrees, as you can see right there. All right, so we're gonna test Lindsay's left shoulder for the second time for shoulder flexion. Okay, again, I'm gonna have Lindsay reach up and back as far as she can. Okay, from there, I'm gonna set the fulcrum at the axis of motion, which is about right here. Can you move your arm one more time? Just down, and then go back. So yeah, so right here, okay, I'm gonna line the stationary arm up. Okay, the stationary arm is gonna be lined up at the axis of motion, and then through her midline, her lateral midline, her thorax, and then the moving arm is going to go and it's going to line up with her lateral epicondyle. Okay, so I'm going to press this down, make sure it's all straight. Perfect. Okay, and then on this one she tested at 163, about 163 degrees for her range of motion. All right, so next up, we're gonna test Lindsay's elbow flexion in her left elbow. Okay, again, I'm gonna find her axis of motion, which will be on her lateral epicondyle. Okay, so we're gonna palpate, it's gonna be right there. Okay, from there, I'm gonna line up the stationary arm with her humerus. Okay, and then the moving arm is gonna line up with her radius. Okay, so we're there. Can you bend her arm one more time, please? Now I'm going to have her flex her arm up. Okay, we're going to track it with the radius. Okay, as far as she could go. Make sure we're lined up. Okay. And her range of motion on that arm is 142. So it'll be 142 degrees on her left arm the first attempt. All right, so we're going to test Lindsay's left elbow for flexion for the second time here. So again, I'm going to find her axis of motion. Okay, I'm going to palpate and find her lateral epicondyle, which is right there. Okay, and that's going to be our access point. Okay, so I'm going to put your arm back down. Yep. Okay, the stationary arm is going to line up with the humerus. Okay, and then the moving arm is going to line up with her radius. Okay, so from there I'm going to have Lindsay flex her arm all the way up. Okay, I'm going to stay with the radius as far as you can. Just hold that for me. Okay, we're lined up right there. Good. Okay, and on this one we got a reading of 141. Okay, it's about 141, just under. So 141. Okay, so this is gonna be Lindsay's first attempt with her left hip flexion. Okay, what I'm having Lindsay do is I'm going to palpate and find her axis of motion, which should be on the greater trochanter of her femur. So I'm going to have her internally rotate her knee. Do it again. One more time. Right there. So that's going to be your axis range of motion. Okay, so I'm going to set up the goniometer right there. I'm going to line up the stationary arm of the goniometer with the lateral midline of her pelvis. Okay, and the moving arm is going to line up with the midline of her femur, the lateral midline of her femur, excuse me. Okay, keeping her right leg as still as possible. I'm going to have her lift her left knee to her chest. Okay, holding it there. Good. Okay. From there, it's lined up with her lateral midline of her femur. Okay, and we get a reading of 108 degrees. So 108 degrees for her first attempt on her lateral hip flexion. Okay, so this is Lindsay's second attempt on her left hip flexion range of motion. We're going to test with the goniometer. Okay, what I'm going to have Lindsay do is I'm going to palpate her hip and try to find her greater trochanter of her femur. So I'm going to have her rotate her knee internally. Okay, right there. Okay, and I'm going to line up the stationary arm with the lateral midline of her pelvis. Okay, the moving arm is going to be lined up with the lateral midline of her femur. Okay, from there, what I'm going to have Lindsay do is I'm going to hold the goniometer in place. I'm going to have her lift her left knee to her chest, keeping her right leg as still as possible. Okay. So for the lateral midline, we're all lined up. Okay, and this reading comes out to 108 degrees. Yeah, 108 degrees. Okay, so this is going to be Lindsay's knee flexion test for her left leg, and this is the first attempt. Okay, what I'm going to have Lindsay do is bend her knee here with her foot flat on the ground, her contralateral leg staying flat on the ground as well. Okay, her foot's going to stay flat on the ground the whole time. I'm going to line up the fulcrum, or the axis of motion, with the lateral epicondyle of her femur, which is right here. Okay, and I'm going to line up the stationary arm with the midline of her, the lateral midline of her femur. Okay, the moving arm is going to be in line with the midline of her fibula, excuse me. Okay, and from there, what I'm going to have Lindsay do is pull her heel to her butt. Okay, keeping her foot flat on the ground the whole way. Okay, so we're here. This is going to move to the lateral midline of the fibula. Okay, and we get a range of motion of 131 degrees. So for her first attempt on her left leg, there's a range of motion of 131 degrees. All right, so for the second attempt on Lindsay's left knee, testing for flexion, again, I'm going to have her bend her knee, keep her foot flat on the ground. Okay, her contralateral leg stays flat. From there, I'm going to line up the fulcrum, or the axis of motion, with the lateral epicondyle of her femur, okay, which is right there. Okay, stationary arm lines up with the lateral midline of her femur, and then the moving arm is going to line up with the lateral midline of her fibula. So what I'm going to do is have Lindsay pull her heel to her butt. Okay, there. I'm going to move this down. Okay, and we're going to get a reading of 129 degrees on Lindsay's second attempt of her left leg. All right, so this is Lindsay's first attempt at ankle dorsiflexion in her left ankle. So again, I'm going to place the axis of motion, or the fulcrum, at her lateral malleolus, okay, which is right here. Okay. The stationary arm is going to line up with the lateral portion of her fibula, okay, leading up to the fibular head. And then the moving arm, okay, the moving arm is going to move parallel to her fifth metatarsal at the in range of motion. So what I'm going to have Lindsay do is pull her toes back to her face. Okay, we're going to line this up with the fifth metatarsal. And we get a reading of 2 degrees. So we have 2 degrees at the end of range of motion for her left ankle dorsiflexion.
4 degrees.
All right, so this is going to be Lindsay's second attempt of left ankle dorsiflexion. So I'm going to find that fulcrum, or the axis of motion, which is the lateral malleolus, okay, which is right here. Okay, from there, I'm going to line up the stationary arm with her lateral fibula leading up to the fibular head. Okay, I'm going to hold that in place. And I'm going to have Lindsay pull her toes back towards her face as far as she can. And I'm going to line up the moving arm with her parallel to her fifth metatarsal. So we have So for this one, we have 2 degrees again. So it'll be 2 degrees, just slightly over 2 degrees, but not quite 3 degrees of range of motion on her dorsiflexion of her left ankle's second attempt. Okay, so this is going to be Lindsay's second attempt at the sit and reach test. Again, we have our 15-inch mark of our measuring tape aligned with Scotch tape, which is unfortunate because it's clear, but we tried to help it out by putting an orange post-it right where the 15-inch mark is, just for the visual. Lindsay's heels are lined up with that 15-inch mark. Her toes are going to remain straight the entire time, hands overlapping, okay, but not reaching out one in front of the other, okay? She's going to attempt this 3 times. We're going to take her greatest attempt. So what I'm going to have Lindsay do now is she's going to take a big deep breath, and from there she's going to reach down as far as she can, and we get 13 inches. She's going to relax, take another big deep breath, and then come back in, hold, get about 13 and a half inches right there, and then her last attempt, big deep breath, exhale and reach. Keep those toes pointed forward, and we get 14 inches. So 14 inches will be the recorded